Have you ever had one of those dreams where you're standing in front of a room full of people and then suddenly realize that you're completely naked? You're exposed, you're embarrassed, you're humiliated, you don't know where to put your hands, you want to run and die of shame. And when you wake up, you realize it was all just a dream, but that feeling might even stay with you. Maybe you've even had a situation in your life where you've been humiliated and know how that feels for real. Well, my guest today started his journey into speaking and speaker training by being humiliated whilst giving a presentation with a professor who was trying to get a message across in probably not the most effective way. That student is now a coach and coaching executives on communication, leadership, and influence. Thankfully, that horrific experience did not put him off. But this week, I'm chatting with Michael Delisser, and we're talking about self-awareness, feedback, mindset, and why most presentation problems aren't technical, they're more internal. So welcome to Present Influence, the show for speakers looking to be known, booked, and paid. If you want to become more persuasive without becoming performative, this week's episode is for you. Let's get to it. And I have been looking forward to speaking with you because I want to get into these topic of self-awareness and leadership and things that you are expert in. But I do know that we don't all start off from good places. I'm always interested to hear where people begin their journey into presentation skills. And I know your story one, but it's an interesting one. Show
Yeah,
us what
so I
happened.
was in a class, and my father had taught communication skills before me, so I wanted to take a presentation skills class. In that first class, I had an experience that was not a positive one. It was kind of a disaster. I was doing my first presentation. It was in front of about 25 other students. And about 2 minutes into the presentation, my professor interrupts me and he says, "Michael, I need to interrupt you because you're using so much filler speech. I can't really focus on the content of your message. So what I'm going to do is raise my hand every time that
Wow.
you say or ah, right?" And I didn't even know I was using filler speech at the time. But now, as I'm continuing to speak, I keep seeing his hand going up in the back, right? And his hand keeps going up. And now that I'm seeing it, I'm hearing myself say and ah, and it makes me say more ums and ahs, and I start to just fall apart in front of the group, right? I'm realizing how bad it sounds. And in the back, the professor at this point, he's using both hands because he can't keep up with all the ums and the ahs. So I'm just falling apart up there. And
Yeah.
then he stops again about a minute later and he says, "Okay, Michael, now you're so focused on the ums and ahs that it's getting worse. So what I'm going to do is not interrupt you anymore and just let you finish your presentation. But I wanted you to be aware of that issue." So I get through the presentation and I'm just humiliated, and I've got to go back and do three more presentations in front of the same audience. And so I was pretty devastated at the time, and I did not want to get back in that class or ever give her another presentation for that matter. And so I just ended up going through that. And here I am, 30 plus years later, and I am teaching executives how to be effective speakers, right? And I do this for a living. And so for me, it was a huge turnaround. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking if I can make this kind of turnaround from falling apart to doing this, pretty much anybody can overcome their presentation fears and or bad experiences.
I'm willing to guess that you don't use that teaching method of raising your
I
hand
do
when they
not.
say a
What
filler
I
word as
do
well,
is
right?
I end up recording people and letting them see for themselves. But and there's something about when someone gets recorded, it just something in the brain clicks. It's much better than me saying, "Hey, you said 25 times," or whatever it was. But when they see it and they see the impact on their overall effectiveness and how distracting it is, it increases their motivation because now they've seen it for themselves for the first time, and you've raised their self-awareness. And that's really the key to going from an okay presenter to a great presenter is developing a really strong self-awareness about all of your different skills and all of your different potential flaws and how to do workarounds for the flaws and how to leverage your strengths.
No, and I like that because Um, I think it's good to have awareness of it, but organizations like Toastmasters, for example, you'll get feedback on how many ums and ahs you. They have someone tasked with counting all of your filler words in a talk. And sure, it's good to have awareness of that up to a point, and certainly they're not making you aware of trying to speak, thankfully. But I do question the value of it in the longer term because I think ultimately you can end up spending too much time focusing on not using the filler language, and potentially starting to sound a bit like when people, stop using any sort of unconscious movement and only ever volitional movements, and it starts to look a bit robotic. I think it
Yeah.
starts to become a bit
Oh,
unnatural.
I
And
agree
I wonder
completely. And the
what you
biggest
think about
challenge
that.
is when people go into a presentation with a perfection mindset. In my career, I've given thousands of presentations. Never once did one go perfect. There's something that can happen in the audience. I'll give you an example. I was presenting to a board of executives at a hospital. In the middle of the presentation, all their pagers went off and they all just ran out of the room and left me standing there. And they didn't tell me why. And then they all eventually came back in and it was some kind of code that happened. And so you've got to recollect yourself after everyone runs out of the room and you don't know if it's because of you or an earthquake or whatever. You don't know what it is. So the point is that you will never give a perfect presentation in your career. And the goal shouldn't be to be perfect. It doesn't, to your point, it doesn't sound conversational. It doesn't sound authentic. The goal would be to reduce any negative habits or ineffective habits to the point that they're less noticeable or barely noticeable so that people can focus on your content. And if you do that, that's good enough. And it still will sound authentic because you're speaking the way you would normally speak, just with not as many ums.
Yeah, I think I even prefer to change the language myself from, rather than thinking that we're aiming for it being perfect. I don't think speeches that go like that. I don't think anyone ever delivers perfect in that sense that you're talking about it there. But if we call that flawless, like no flaws at all, no filler words, no mistakes, nothing, I think that's unnatural and unattainable for most of us, but I don't think it's perfect. And so I don't see that as being a perfect talk. For me, a perfect talk is one that connects, that gets emotion, that gets a response, that gets the audience to do what they want. And those are things that make a talk perfect, that they're not like focused on this sort of flawless perfectionism that I think people end up ultimately getting stuck on and judging
Yeah, and that's
themselves,
why
beating
whenever
themselves
I'm
up
I'm
over.
recording someone or see that someone is either reading a script or trying to get it perfect, I just cut them off and say, "That's not gonna work," right? Because, I mean, granted, if you're in a legal situation, you have to say things just the right way, or if you're a politician and you're doing your scripted speech, whatever. But most of those politicians don't sound authentic anyway. They sound like they're reading from a teleprompter, which they are. And so when people get in their mind, it needs to come out of my mouth a certain way, that's when they end up building up their own anxieties and fears when they shouldn't even be doing that because you're the only one in your mind that had a belief that it should come out a certain way. And you're creating more pressure on yourself to have it be that way instead of authentically just allowing it to come out. That's also why I tell people, don't try to be a motivational speaker. Don't try to be who you are and what your personality is. Then you'll come across as authentic. You'll learn to leverage your
Right.
strengths and you'll learn to minimize your weaknesses or work around them.
It's interesting you say that because I do have to edit because I edit my own show. I edit a lot of interviews and I hear everybody's filler language, and I probably hear it more than most people. And I used to when I first started podcasting, I used to edit it all out, all of the ums, all of the ahs, and definitely saw it as being an imperfection. And eventually came to realize it was making the conversation natural. And so now I very much aim for having maybe reduce if it's excessive, I'll reduce it, but if it's not, it's just natural conversation, so I just leave it because that is how we actually talk to each other. And so, but it is sometimes interesting to see just how much we use that and how normal it is for
Yeah.
people to repeat stuff or stumble over words and have to restart sentences or get halfway through a thought and change track. And it's very interesting to see these things, but I think you only can really see them if you record
Yeah.
this stuff
Yeah,
and
it's
play it
so
back.
interesting just when I'm giving feedback to people and I'm helping them, the two things, and I teach lots of different areas of leadership development and communication skills, but the two things that when anyone's putting together their own development plan or their own priorities to focus on, there's two areas I tell people they should spend 100% of their attention on, right? One is developing your strengths and the other one is minimizing your worst weaknesses. Not all of them, just the ones that really stand out to others. And so, there's some research talks about referring to them as fatal flaws, but things that cause you to not be able to get your message across to others or are so distracting that it causes a problem. If you focus your energy on leveraging your strengths, you're going to be using all the things that make you who you are to make your presentation stronger. That doesn't mean being a motivational speaker. It means if you're a very logical, structured person who's introverted, using your strength of logic and structure and putting together a sound argument to make your presentation persuasive. Don't try to be the extroverted, outgoing, super friendly presentation because it won't sound like you. So you're not leveraging your strengths. In fact, what you're doing is probably trying to use a weakness that's not going to help your overall effectiveness.
It's fascinating to me, and probably we're going to be sort of, in speaking to each other, we might well be preaching to the choir. So I'll be interested to see if there's any things that we don't concur on completely. But um, one of the things that I have a whole presentation about this, and it's part of I'm working on at the moment as well, talking about what I call charisma killers, the things that kind of kill your ability to communicate and be effective on stage. And this is interesting. But uh, a big part of it is just for many people, just addressing these things that actually damage the way you connect with an audience might be enough to get you to where you want to be as a speaker without having to really develop much further from that. That you might actually be just about fine. Sometimes it is more about what you take away than what you add, and I think you have a
Oh
similar
yeah, I mean, you
philosophy on
can
that. Am I
say what
right?
you could take what you just said and apply it to every aspect of presenting. Taking away content is better than adding more, right? I mean, people try to cover the 10 most important points. No, you should be covering the 2 to 3 that are most critical to your audience. The other 7 you can put in a handout, right? Or something else. And so you want to keep your focus on your content on the most important things, on what you focus on and trying to improve as a presenter, on the few things that'll have the 80% of the impact, right? Those 20% of the things that if you work on will have the 80% of the impact. So and more often than not, it's not trying to improve 10 things. It's in trying to improve the one thing that's holding you back the most. And when you're done with that, you could take on the second thing, right? But focus your energy on fewer things and you will get better results both in your presentations and in your ability to improve your ability to develop content and or deliver it.
Yeah. So the volume of information, yeah, two things, but the volume of information, the distracting habits, if we can minimize those and reduce things, is gonna make significant impact. But what else
The
potentially is
one
gonna
thing
help
that
there?
I see consistently missing, and I work a lot with sales teams, I work with executives that are presenting to a board or, in a lot of these scenarios, people are presenting from a standpoint of here's what I want to say, as opposed to saying, what am I trying to achieve and what does the audience need to hear in order to achieve that? Right. And so it gets into what do I want to say to this group? And you start thinking, I need, instead of why are they even here? Am I going to waste their time or am I going to speak to an outcome? And so what people do is they start putting together their presentations without a clear end in mind or a clear outcome defined. If you stop and define your outcomes first, then develop your content, your presentation will be way better than starting to develop content that just happens to get to some outcomes. It focuses you on just the few things that are most important.
Yeah. And I feel like this is a message that I think comes through time and time again. You all need to hear it time and time again. Because so many people don't do it. How many times to hear it before you actually do it? I speak to myself here as well with this. So, we do get into this trap of because we live in our own heads. We think, oh, this is my voice. This is it. This is what I want to say. And we don't take that little journey outside into what do they actually need to hear and what needs to be said here that's going to have an impact with that audience, at least as best you can imagine. So it's very hard to identify our own weaknesses. So working with someone like yourself is going to be very important. That would find themselves with greatest weaknesses and how best can we
Yeah, for
approach
me, I mean, I
identifying them?
see, I mean, I've coached hundreds of people one on one on presentations, and I see some very common patterns in terms of the things people do that hurt them the most, right? One is trying to cover too much information. Another one is not having a clear purpose and then having all your content aligned to that purpose, right? And so they end up covering things that they don't need to cover or not Every presentation, every good presentation should flow like a story. And if you don't have a detail that's relevant to getting to the outcome you're trying to achieve, it should not be in your presentation. So, really spending more time assessing what you're including and why, applying the 80/20 rule and saying, of the 100% that I could apply, what is the 20% that'll have the 80% impact? And then starting with that and just putting your presentation around that. That's one issue. Another one is not being aware of the flow of their presentation. So, spending too much time on one slide, having a particularly complicated diagram and throwing it up at one time and allowing other people to have conversations about a part of it that you're not talking about, not using animation to make things pop up at the exact moment that you want to talk about it. But there's so many different things that I see consistently where people get stuck on one slide and it feels like the presentation stopped because they've been there for 5 minutes, right? And so if you're using slides or if you're presenting any content, what are you doing to make sure that the flow is there, that it's logically leading from one point to the next, and you're focusing on what's most important to your audience. And you have to know your audience to get there. So that's the other mistake people make is I regularly see salespeople that come in and they give me their standard sales pitch, and I'm like, I'm not buying your product, and I'll literally say to them, tell me about what you just presented to me, how that was specific to me versus making it something you could just give to anyone. And they're like, well, I give this to everyone. I'm like, well, that's why you're going to struggle with sales because if I don't feel like you're customizing your presentation to me, I feel like you're just throwing out your generic pitch, and that's not persuasive. So I work a lot on really knowing your audience, finding out what's important to them, and making sure your entire content speaks to what's important to them as opposed to what you want to say.
But it's interesting you say that because one of the things that's been coming up a bunch of times in conversations I've been having with people in the industry is about how much more demand there is for customization in talks and presentations for businesses. Whilst definitely speakers who I know personally and I do myself who will adapt their presentations to wherever they're going and do a bit of work and research. There are definitely more that they're very much the also cut and paste speakers who will take exactly the same presentation everywhere, who aren't doing that. But the industry is now, in terms of, well, I said corporate speaking, probably more than anything else, very much demanding more audience interaction in talks and more customization to their roles. So what you're saying is that this stuff is critical, really critical in being able to get the bookings and be effective
Yeah, and it's
in
it's
those
about
environments.
knowing how to keep your audience engaged from beginning to end, right? That starts with having a very clear audience focused purpose that speaks to something that's important to them, right? And when you grab their attention, then you still have to find ways to keep their attention by making each slide relevant to something that hits on a pain or gain for them, particularly if you're doing a persuasive presentation. And what ends up happening is if you don't take the time to make sure that you're constantly giving them a reason to stay focused, then they start to multitask, especially if you're doing something virtual like this, where they start to, the world's attention span is getting shorter and shorter. So either you're finding a way to keep them engaged and continually speaking to their needs and hitting on the hot buttons for them, or you should assume that at 5 or 10 minutes into your presentation, they're daydreaming or multitasking or doing something else. And that's the real challenge is if you're not 100%
Yeah.
dialed in on your audience's needs, and if you're presenting too much information and not focusing on just a few things that are most important to that audience, you're going to lose them and you're not going to be persuasive.
Let me ask you, what when people come to work with you, what usually is the main goal, the main outcome that they're looking to achieve from working with somebody like
It's
yourself?
usually one of three things. I think one is helping make their content really hit home with the audience more because they've been told that, that really didn't move me or that wasn't over, so getting the content more not both tighter and more audience focused. That would be one of the things. The second thing would be even at the executive level, overcoming, the conversations they're having in their own head. And sometimes that's related to fears or thinking about did it come out the right way or judging. And so there's this whole mindset piece where I will ask people to, when they're presenting, what were the thoughts that were going through your head in your last presentation? when something didn't go well, what was literally the words that you said to yourself in your brain? And what you start to get people to do is become aware of their mindset. And so on the mindset scale, you can go from avoiding, like, I don't want to be here, but I have to give this presentation. So I'm doing everything I can to avoid it. Or you can go towards accepting, knowing it's part of your job, but sometimes enjoying it, but not really loving it, or really seeking, getting up there and being excited to present. And the challenge you have is that if you have some conversation going on in your head that's like, "Oh, I hope I don't mess up," or I hope this audience isn't judging me, or they're gonna think I don't know what I'm talking about." All of those conversations cause you to be in that either avoiding, well, maybe not avoiding, but maybe you're in that place where your conversations are not adding to your confidence in the way you deliver, and because of that, your presentation is gonna fall flat. So, the first thing is on this particular topic, and your mindset could be different on every topic, asking them, what is your mindset? What are the thoughts that you're having? And then if they're not, I'm going to crush this and this is going to go really well and I'm excited and I'm the expert in the room, then helping them become aware and catching themselves when they start to use that negative conversation or anything that changes them. Because if you don't walk in the door feeling confident that you are the person that's going to deliver this well, then the audience, or that you don't want to be there, your audience can detect that. And so, what can you do for yourself to change your mindset?
I think those things are the things that probably have the potential to be as distracting as somebody putting their hand up each time you say, I feel like they can really take you out of it and take your attention away from what you're doing. Yeah, I was chatting with just commenting on a post on LinkedIn yesterday, a speaker who was saying, doing like 5 days of keynotes, which is like five, good for you, man. But five in a row. He said like on day five, halfway through the keynote, he was already thinking about his next presentation next week, even thinking about the first lines of it. I had to like snap himself back into being present there and focusing on what he was doing because his brain was like trying to take him into next week. And like, yeah, I've done that on podcasts, I've done that on stage, I've done it in comedy shows. It's just like we do this to ourselves, and it's like we have to be present and in the moment and there with the audience and for ourselves, not thinking about what did I mess up last time,
Yeah.
what if I mess up this time. Just
And which, by the way, those
be there
conversations in
and
our head have
connect.
probably been there most of our lives, right? They're learned behaviors. And so part of the message to yourself is when you getting good at catching yourself with that negative thought and reminding yourself that's an old program in your brain and it's not true unless you make it true. I at that time I was going through that presentation that went horribly in college. I was going through another class with a professor on intercultural communication, and she was talking about how some cultures things like they view death as a a great thing. And then, but the point she was making is that there is no good or bad in the world unless you choose it, right? There's no animal in the world that thinks good or bad. It's only humans, and all the rest. If animals are in a drought and they can't have food, they're not sitting there thinking the situation stinks. They're just conserving their energy, right? Or if they don't have any water. And so at that time, what she's basically saying is you have an ability to choose whether a situation is good or bad. You just had a presentation that went bad. You could sit there and say, "Oh no, this is horrible," or you could say, "Wow, I have an opportunity to learn from this and really get better." Right. And so the mindset is really key, is catching yourself with the negative thought and then saying, nope, that's not what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is take this experience and make it into a tool to help me be improved dramatically. And then you get excited about doing something with it as opposed to regretting that it happened. Mm.
Yeah. Which I guess goes some way to explaining how and why you turned around that negative experience into something that you built a career on, helping other people make better for themselves and for yourself as well. Like, in terms of not just how you prepare that professionally and helping other people, but experience on stage, where do you feel that you've been able to make the biggest breakthroughs and improvements? And I'll add to that as well. I hope it doesn't make the question too complicated, but how has that benefited you
The
professionally and
thing that I
personally?
always resort back to anytime I'm putting together a presentation is did I answer the three questions that every audience has in the back of their mind, right? The first question is, do I trust you? And so when you're putting together a presentation, if you haven't done something in the first few minutes to demonstrate your trust. And there's two types of trust. There's personal trust. Do I trust you as a person? And the other one is professional trust. Do I trust your knowledge on this topic you're talking about? And so the first question every audience wants to know is, should I trust this person? That's why when you see a news program and they have an expert on, before the person opens their mouth, they rattle off 10 or 11 things about this person's background. They're the author of this, they're 10 years doing this. And they want to take any doubt in your brain about if you should trust this person who's about to speak. So what are you doing in your own presentations? Are you upfront? And I'm not talking about bragging. I'm talking about, for example, saying things that prove you know your audience's needs. That will develop personal trust. Discussing how you researched a topic and how you came up with your information could cause professional trust or your credentials without necessarily saying, I have a PhD and I have this. You don't have to say your credentials. You can just deliver your experience around
Right.
it in a way that's part of the story. Right. So that's one thing is, do I trust you? The second question is, can I follow you? Do I understand you? And so that is, did I lay this out in a logical way that introduces a problem or a challenge and leads to why this solution is the right path forward and how do we get implemented, if you're doing an actual presenting an idea or a solution. So that's the second one is, did you lay it out logically? Did you only cover the most critical detail that's needed for the audience? And then did you do it in a way that is easy for them to follow? And the third question is, did I connect to the audience's needs? Did I, make them feel the presentation and feel like I spoke to their hot buttons? And so if I work on those three questions, personalizing it to feel to the hot buttons, making sure I've laid it out as a good flowing story that logically leads them down the road, giving good evidence, and then also establishing my own credibility. If you do those three things, you're going to have a pretty good presentation. And the key is, as you're putting together your content, making sure you're answering those three questions.
Right. And these really are the cornerstones of good
Yeah.
communication as laid down by Aristotle, right? And this is
Those three
ethos,
things are
logos, and
directly
pathos, yeah?
aligned to, the three Aristotle, so the first one is ethos, which is establishing your credibility for the most part, establishing trust. The second one is logos, which is the logic, and the third one is pathos, which is the emotional connection. And so I go through every time I'm presenting and look at those three things. And when I'm giving feedback to others, I'm looking to see how they did in those three things. Because all of us are typically stronger at one of those three things. And we usually have one that we're weaker at, right? When I ask people when I'm coaching them or in classes, which are you strongest at? Most people feel like they're strongest at creating the logical argument. If there's an area where they need to improve, it's one, spending more time establishing their credibility with the audience, or it's more often than not, did I personalize it to the point that I spoke to their hot buttons? And you can leave out any one of those three and you lose your persuasiveness. And so you need to know which one is your strength and which one's your weakness and work on those two, leveraging the strength and minimizing the weakness one.
Yeah. In my experience, I agree. People often struggle with all three of those, but they usually have one area probably is the biggest challenge. Um, my experience has mostly been that it's
Mhm.
the pathos, the connection area, the emotional area where people seem to struggle the most on stage, especially in corporate environments, in professional speaking environments, where I think this whole concept of professionalism sometimes gets in the way of making
Yeah, and I'll give
connection
you a
and
great
relating to the
example of
audience.
exactly what you just said. I will have people say to me, "Oh, our senior leadership isn't interested in our ideas." And I'll say, "Well, tell me about the last time you presented an idea." And I'll say, "Tell me how you presented it." And what I hear more often than not is, "Hey, I have an idea that we should implement, and here's, you know, how we should do it." But what they forget to do is paint the pain of the problem in detail. Because if you end up bringing an idea to someone and they don't feel the pain of the problem, they don't want to buy your solution. But if they feel the pain of the problem, by the time they're done hearing the cost of the problem to your customer, to your department, to your overall productivity, to your employee engagement numbers, whatever the issue might be, if you make them feel the pain of that problem, now they're hungry for a solution and they want to hear your solution. And so what people do is when they present to executives and they fail, more often than not, they didn't spend enough time making them feel the pain of the problem from a standpoint of what is pain to the executives, not to you personally, right? So, what's important to the executives, and how do you frame the issue that you're trying to resolve in terms of the three things that they care about the most? What are the metrics they care about? What are the outcomes they care about? And then once you've made that connection, then you can say, okay, now that I know these are the things, how do I say it in a way that's going to make them want my solution and get hungry for it? Then you deliver the solution, and now they're all ears because you just made them realize we got to solve this problem because you made them feel the pain.
Than that, it's like, um, I fairly regularly put out LinkedIn articles, and I like writing, Michael. I enjoy it. Most of the time, yeah, I guess I've got some followers. Some people comment, but it's a lot of crickets. It's not a huge amount of responsiveness. Yesterday, I put out an article that was really about why so many great speakers are broke. And you would, maybe you would believe, but the response to that one article had been phenomenal. And it's just like, and my head almost exploded because I'm pretty used to being pretty well ignored on LinkedIn. And all of a sudden, everyone's everyone's commenting and checking in, and people are booking in some, like, what's going on? Um, which of course I love, but it's definitely an example of speaking to people in the language of their
Yeah.
pain and what's really hitting them. And that clearly resonated with so many people about the whole thing of needing to treat in career as a business as well. That the response
Yeah, and when
probably
I go
shouldn't be too
through, like, let's say
surprising.
someone typically in a coaching session, one of the first things I'll have them do is do a 5-minute presentation to me. And I within 5 minutes, I can tell you what are the few things they need to work on. I mean, it comes out pretty clearly. But then I'll stop and I'll go through each individual slide, and I'll sit there and I'll ask them, "What is the purpose of this slide right here? Like, what outcome do you want to achieve by putting this slide in your presentation?" And they'll tell me what the outcome is, and then I'll say, "Well, why doesn't your heading speak to that outcome, and why doesn't your content speak to that outcome? Why is it not on there? Or what words are you going to say when you show this slide, or whatever it is you're showing, or what story you're telling, or whatever it may be?" And there's like this light that goes on in their heads when they realize, "Oh, you know what? I don't need this slide in there. Oh, I didn't speak to what's most important to my audience on this." So if they stop and say, there needs to be a clear purpose for everything you cover, and that purpose needs to be articulated in a way that speaks to what's important to your audience. And more often than not, people articulate it sometimes, but what's in a way that's what's important to them personally. It's me, and I, or they just never actually they put information out there, but they never connect the dots to why you should care about this. And so I'll say, why should your audience care about this? And then they'll look at the slide and be like, this doesn't even speak to the reason why they should care, and they'll redesign it. All right. So
One of the things that helps people be effective, I think, on stage as communicators is being able to be trusted in their own personality, be competent, confident in them in their content as well. And I wonder if we will agree on this, but um, do you feel that anybody, a good speaker, anyone could be a great communicator, or are there personalities that you feel definitely are more suited to this, and some that just
yeah, the answer to the
maybe
first
really
question
aren't?
is absolutely anybody with any personality preferences can be a powerful speaker, provided they are leveraging their strengths and creating workarounds for their weaknesses, right? So, great example. You could say that there's two more outgoing personality types: the result driven personality and the people person driven personality. They can be outgoing and articulate, and they can make their points in very convincing ways, but for the results driven person, are you doing it in a way that speaks to your audience's interests? And for the individual person, they may be good at speaking to the audience's interests, but are you laying it out in a structured way that makes sense to people? And you could go through each personality type. And if I knew someone's personality assessments before I watched them present, I can pretty much anticipate the habits they're going to have based on their personality. And so if you were an introverted personality, whether you're more structured or you're more kind of mission focused and why focused, and you're more of an information driven person, those two personalities are more likely to give too much detail because they're trying to get you to fully understand things or lay things out fully logical. And those would be the two personality types that are most likely to give too much information. If you're more of a people person, you're more likely to jump off topic and just kind of have fun with the audience, but you're not necessarily going down a structured path. And if you are more of a results driven person, you may be saying it in a way that doesn't connect with people because you're so focused on the result. And so what I do is I get people to recognize how their personality impacts how their content comes across. And then I say to them, you need to, for every presentation, review it for all four personality needs. So a results driven person needs a very clear what, and they need it succinctly delivered. A people person needs to hear the who, who's going to be impacted and how will we be involved in it, those kind of things. If you're more of a why focused person or a mission driven person, you want to make sure people fully understand the why. And if you're more of a structure person, you have to make a clear path to the how. And so if you are thinking of those four things, what needs to be said, who needs to hear it and why it's important to them, the why is the third one. And then the fourth one is how do I deliver it in a structured way? You will become much more effective. And for me, I'm good on the two people personality type, the why and the people person, but I'm not strong in structure or results. So when I do a review of my presentation, I do a review just for how well structured is it? How logical is it? Did I provide the right evidence and only the right evidence and limit it to the most important evidence? And did I do it in a succinct way? And for the people that maybe have more why questions, maybe I give them a handout with more information they'll look at later. But you have to cater to all four personality needs. And we all have all four of those personalities in us. We have an ability to dial them up in the moments we need them. So people will tell me, sometimes when I'm presenting, I've actually had someone tell me, you're, yeah, you must be like structure driven, because you were very structured in the way you present. That's my absolute weakest one. That's like the greatest compliment I could ever receive is someone calling me structured because more often than not, my lack of structure is what gets me into trouble when I'm presenting.
Yeah, I get that. I see it in my speaking journey. I see that information let's say information and people focused probably my natural style. So sometimes the sort of results and structure stuff was not so good, but I do see that now. I naturally do that in my presentations and how I create them, but it is from experience and repetition and training and all those things that I'm able to do that. It didn't just happen. And so I definitely get how important it is to be able to communicate in that sort of way and make sure you capture the whole room because whilst I'm not big on the sort of you've come across like learning styles that some of this stuff got based on of like people say I'm a visual learner or I'm an auditory learner and stuff like that. It's like yeah we all are, we're all of these things, but we do have some preferences that's important to cater to, but nobody is purely a visual learner. Nobody's purely a learner unless they have to be, right? Nobody's purely a kinesthetic learner. It's like we all have these, we just have preferences within them. And I don't think you ever come across the people say, "Oh no, I can't." I've even heard this. I can't listen to a podcast. I'm a visual
But
learner.
and look,
Lost.
it's
That's
it's just like saying
ridiculous.
personality types. I have a preference for results or for people or for structure, right? It's the same thing. But to actually build presentations to learning styles ignores the outcome focus. Like if you're focusing on outcomes, if your outcome, let's say you're doing a safety training, right? And you need people to be safe, doing it auditory as opposed to showing them how to be safe is not going to work, right? And so you have to think about what's the outcome I'm trying to achieve and what is the best means for delivering it and can I overlap a couple different things that accommodate a couple of those both auditory and, kinesthetic or whatever it is. But you cannot put together your presentation with a style in mind. You have to put together your presentation with an outcome in mind and then figure out how do you deliver it in a way that gets to that outcome. And sometimes it needs to involve a demonstration. It needs to involve a video. It needs to involve, but you choose the delivery method based on the outcome you're trying to achieve and which method is going to be most effective to achieve that. And if it's informational and you want people to retain the information, just saying it once isn't going to get it done. So are you also going to give them something in writing? Are you also going to give them some kind of story that makes it more memorable? There's a lot of techniques you can use, but you need to keep it focused on the outcomes you're trying to achieve and have that drive it. And then later you could say, okay, did I speak to these personality types? Did I speak to these learning styles? But you cannot start with that. That's a mistake if you
Yeah,
start
you
with
can
that.
check in again. Right. Yeah, I would concur with that. With all the areas that you do work with people on, is there a particular element that you tend to find makes the biggest difference, make the biggest impact on how they show up or how they
The two
speak and
things I
present?
think are the biggest is mindset, getting them to tell me what are their thoughts about presenting this to this particular audience and getting it out on the table, or what are the thoughts that they're having, because those will be the biggest barrier, one of the biggest barriers to preventing them from delivering it effectively if those thoughts are counter to achieving their outcome. If they're worried about being judged by their executives they're presenting to, or worried about, get it out and then get them good at blocking those thoughts or replacing them. Not necessarily blocking, because you need to embrace them, but also replace them. So it's what can you do to catch yourself in the moment of having a thought that's counterproductive and turning it into something positive. And look, you can, a lot of these things, you can, these same habits you do when you present, they'll be in regular conversations. So you can actually use regular conversations. Like for me, when I was working on reducing my filler speech, I would take a one-on-one conversation with a friend, and for that one conversation, I go way out of my way to stop using filler speech in that one-on-one conversation. And it eventually translates to how you present, because you become more and more aware in an offstage situation, so to speak. So that's one of the things. The other one too is not getting into the head of their audiences. You must understand what is most important to them and speak to what's most important to them. And I regularly will hear presentations that are not customized to the audience. They've done nothing to personalize or to make it feel like it's that for them. And they spend more time talking about what they want to achieve as opposed to why it's important for the audience to know, to achieve it. So those are two of the things that come to mind. And then
Yeah,
the flow thing constantly comes up too. People, the way I look at it is when you're putting together a presentation, it's always better to try to watch your recording of it first to see where it slows down or where it stops, or where do I lose my momentum. And then also looking at the, do I have a why for every slide? Because more often than not, the first time they go through it with me and the second time they go through it with me, there's probably 10 to 15 less slides involved. And it's because they realized there wasn't a good why, and they were focusing on more than the most important 20%. And if people do that and then leveraging their own strengths, that'll make a big difference. I think what people need to recognize is that with technology advances and AI, more and more of the technical part of our jobs are going to be replaced. And so, what does that leave us with? It leaves us with our ability to get results done through others as a leader. And your primary means for doing that is going to be, either in one on one conversations, meeting management, giving presentations or writing, right? Three of those, well, actually, all four of those, every principle we've talked about so far is relevant to all four of those types of communication. And so I call them the leadership communication core four. And I'm in the process of writing a second book that's focused on just those four areas. But ultimately, your ability to be effective in the future and really be stand out as different is going to come down to your communication skills, because more and more of your technical skills are going to get replaced much faster than your communication skills. So if you cannot articulate what you need or want in a persuasive way that speaks to the needs of an audience, your ability as a leader is going to be very limited. And look, you can create a presentation for a one-on-one or for a meeting or for, something that's actual presentation to a larger group. Regardless of that, you have to find a way to make people want to follow your ideas or follow you as a leader. And if you can't do that well, you're going to struggle. And I will tell you that if you get really good at those four things, coaching, meeting management, presentation skills, more often than not, you can use that in meetings as well. Those are the things that are going to make you stand out and get people to want to follow and get people to want to buy into your ideas. And more as AI takes over more and more of our technical things. So I think it's becoming more critical. And unfortunately, we also live in a time where people are getting less effective at it because they're using technology instead of
yeah,
working on these skills. And so we see a trend that requires more
right.
of it and a reduction in skill overall. And that's a bad separation that's not going to help your success. So I would tell people, if you really want to stand out as a leader, work on this in particular and your one on one skills using the same principles. Those two things will really make a difference in your career success and will help you at higher and higher levels, because most people get fired eventually based on a lack of communication skills, not because of technical skills.
True, true enough. It's interesting, fascinating to me, maybe to you too, that these skills were so vitally important at a time when there was no technology. So the pre-industrial revolution over centuries, ancient Greece and Rome is like these skills of oratory and rhetoric were vitally important in leadership there. And now in a time of advanced technology and the advent of AI, they're just as important again. I think maybe they haven't ever stopped being so important. These are ultimately these skills of leadership and communication that I agree with you. I don't think they're ever going to go away or be replaced. And we need to learn them.
Yeah, and that they're
Yeah.
increasing in importance because technology is becoming more and more automated, and people, there's a great quote from a Harvard professor that I can't think of the name of the person, but that basically said, "You're not going to be replaced by AI, but people who are not using AI are going to be replaced by people who are using AI," right? And so you need to embrace the technology that's out there in order to be successful, but to really stand out, everyone else is embracing that too. So you need to work on your communication skills to make you stand out so that you are not just another person using AI, but you're a person that can articulate your ideas and sell them to others and get people on board and want to follow you.
100%. Luddites beware, pay attention is that we need to embrace the technology. Um, You mentioned you have a new book in the works. So you already have a book out. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, the book that I have out is all about self-awareness raising, and so it's called Leadership Accelerator. The subline to it is, you know, they're basically high impact communication skills that improve your ability to get results and improve relationships, right? And so, but ultimately focuses on three things, and these are critical to your effectiveness as a presenter as well. But do you have high self-awareness and self-control, right? And those are two areas of emotional intelligence. And in the book, it's built to help you improve your skill in these things, all of them. But the first one is improving your emotional intelligence, particularly in the two areas that are self-focused. So self-awareness and self-control, and being able to manage those emotions that are happening, the fears and whatever else is going on when you present. The second area is understanding what communication habits you have and how they're helping or hurting your effectiveness, and leveraging the strong communication habits and minimizing and creating workarounds for the ones that are not so effective. And the third area I focus on is how your personality impacts every aspect of how you communicate and your relationships with others, and how by accommodating the personality types of others, you can present what you need to say in a way that allows you to have a better relationship with them and or come across more clearly. So those are the three main areas that I focus on. But the book is set up by saying, here's an assessment to help you improve in one of these areas. Here are specific things you can do to immediately improve in those areas. And then here's a way to plan out how you can make it happen. Because more often than not, anytime you're working on a communication skill or overcoming a communication habit, you need to focus on it daily or you will not make progress. And daily could be one conversation a day, but doing something to work on that thing, because we're trying to overcome things that we've been doing for decades, and they don't go away overnight unless you give it daily attention.
Yeah. And the book's called
Leadership Accelerators with an S
Leadership
on the end. It's
Accelerators.
available on Amazon. So if people go out there and do a search for Leadership Accelerators, they'll see it out there.
Very cool. And based on you're saying about there's that little challenges in there for people to take. Based on everything that our listener has heard from us today, is there a challenge that you would give to them and say, hey, look, you could go and work on this right now and put what we've been talking about into action, improve your self-awareness and so on?
Yeah, and we kind of led with this in the beginning of the conversation, but anything they can do to get feedback on how they're coming across in different contexts, right? So whether it's one-on-one, whether it's in your presentations, and it's got to be immediately following, and even going to people in advance of a presentation saying, "Hey, I'm going to be presenting. Can you take note of the things I do really well and the things that I could work on that could help improve me?" The best tool for doing that is recording yourself. You will learn more from a recording than anything else because you'll see it happening and see the impact of it. But you have to constantly look for ways to get feedback, and look at all feedback as a gift and all experiences as an opportunity to learn. Going back to what I said earlier, you can sit there, like I did initially when I had my terrible presentation and say, I don't want to go back in front of those people. And it was a terrible experience. Or you can say to yourself, you know what? More people learn from their negative experiences when presenting than from the positive ones. So, what am I going to do to take this experience and turn it into a positive? How am I going to change my own mindset to say, this was not bad that it happened because now I'm going to become even much better having had this experience? Once you shift in your head and see all experiences and all feedback is good because it increases your self awareness and your ability to improve, then you can really start to accelerate your ability to improve. And it really comes down to moving from a place of self-perception to self-awareness. Self-perception is what I think about myself. Self-awareness is when other people confirm that what I think about myself is accurate. And that's the real key is once you get to a place of self-awareness, you can start to focus on those one or two things that'll have the biggest positive impact.
Yeah. I would just share this before we finish up, but sometimes when I get feedback, and I do love getting feedback, but sometimes when I get feedback and it's not great and it's a bit like, okay, that's a lot. It can take me a day or so to need to sit with it before I stop taking it personal and all right, I can work with this now. I have to get out my own way. So I think people need to be prepared. Sometimes it's hard not to take the feedback personally, but you get there and it's still going to be beneficial. So it's worth bearing the discomfort of some uncomfortable feedback for the results that you'll get in the long run, for sure.
Well, and what you just said is critical. It's you have to be in the right mindset to receive the feedback. So don't ask for it unless you're ready to hear anything, right? Because if you go into the feedbacks almost with a objective consultant mindset of, I'm going to learn what I can and imagine this isn't feedback for me, it's just feedback that I can deliver to me later, right? When you go into the mindset of, it may not be what I want to hear, or it may not even be said that way I want to hear it, but it's going to be good that I hear it in an objective way. If you go in with that mindset, you will hear it well and you won't start to suddenly defend yourself or, because if you don't react well to the feedback when you get it, you will not get it again from that person. And so your ability to improve comes down to your ability to hear it objectively. And no matter how it's stated, find a way to positively turn it into a gift, right? All feedback is a gift if you do something with it to improve or help you become more effective in your relationships and results.
I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up our conversation, Michael. I hope people will go and check out your book. I'll have links in the show notes for people who would like to find out more about you and maybe even get in touch. And I just want to say thank you for coming and being my guest today and having a great conversation with me. And also for struggling through with some of the technical challenges we've had today as well. It's been worth pushing through with that.
And I know we had a lot of issues along the way that people won't see because you'll edit them out, but this was a challenging one. And I'm going to get work on my internet in a minute.
I'll let you to do that, Michael, but thank you so much and speak again soon. Take care. If there's one thread that runs through this whole episode, I'd say it's this. You can't improve what you're unwilling to see or what you don't know is there. Self-perception is what you think about yourself. Self-awareness is when other people confirm whether or not that's true. Now, there's a gap between the two, and that's often where speakers live. So here's your challenge. Record yourself. Ask for feedback. When you get it, resist the urge to defend it. Just listen and accept the feedback. Be gracious. Remember, influence isn't about being flawless, it's about being aware. If this episode has helped you in any way, make sure you're following the show. And maybe even share this with somebody who already thinks they're a great communicator. You might be doing them a favor. I'm going to be back very soon with a political speechwriter talking about some of the differences in political speech writing and in speech writing in general, things that might be helpful with you, some of the rules of rhetoric that we may have covered sometimes on the show before. He's been a political speechwriter in the US, and it is interesting to hear about some of the differences and things that go on there as well. So wherever you're going, whatever you're doing, have an amazing rest of your day and week. We'll see you next time.